Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 Star Trek The Next Generation episode soundtracks. So in this video I count down my 10 favorite music or episodes that have the best music of Star Trek The Next Generation in my humble opinion. The musical scores of episodes that I like the most. So I've been talking a lot about music in Star Trek during my reviews of Star Trek episodes, and I decided, hey, why don't I just do a sort of top 10 of my favorite episodes of music, or my favorite musical scores from specific episodes. Now, I realized I didn't want to do all of Star Trek in one video because then there's just too many episodes I want to talk about, so I would have to do like a top 50 or top 40 or something like that. So if I wanted to keep it to a top 10, I would have to do each show individually. Now, I'm starting with Next Generation because I decided not to go in order. Because I will do a video for the original series, but I didn't want to start with the original series because that's actually my least favorite or my least interest in their music. So I wanted to start with the show that I was most interested in, and the one that I most wanted to talk about the music, and that's Star Trek Next Generation. So after I do Next Generation, I'll do Deep Space Nine, and after Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and then I'm going to do the movies, the Star Trek movies, where I'm going to rank all of the movies from my least favorite to my favorite score. And then I'll move over to Enterprise, and then after I do Enterprise, I'll do the original series. So that's kind of a wonky order, but I'm doing it in order of my interest rather than chronological order. And also, so I'll be doing one per month. So it's going to take me a while to get through these. It's not like I'm doing them all in 1 week or doing them weekly. I'm doing them monthly. Just because I got all this other stuff going on my channel right now, and so I don't want this to dominate my channel, so this will be once a month. So for this month, the first video, I'm starting with Star Trek The Next Generation. So, even though I will be talking about music, I won't really be including the music that much, maybe a little bit in this video because of YouTube rules and whatnot. But if you want to watch a version of this video where that may not be the case, the extended version of my video will be on my Patreon page, and I will make it public for anyone to see, so you don't have to be a member of my Patreon, at least a paying member of my Patreon. You might have to be a free member, I'm not sure, but yeah, it's public and there for anyone to see on my Patreon page, the extended version. I'll put the link to that in the description below if you want to see a version that is a bit longer and may include some things that aren't included in this version. So anyway, go ahead and start with some honorable mentions. So I'll do what I do in several other top 10 videos I make. I'll list a whole bunch of honorable mentions, but I'm just going to name the title and the composer that composed the music and then move on. And when I get to my top 3 honorable mentions, then I'll get into a little bit more detail on each honorable mention. And then I will get into my top 10 and get into more detail on each entry on my top 10. Cool. So let's start with my first honorable mention, which is True Q. The composer for that episode is Jay Chataway. Next honorable mention is Skin of Evil. The composer for that is Ron Jones. Next honorable mention is Haven. The composer for that is Dennis McCarthy. Next honorable mention is The Pegasus. The composer for that is John Debney. Now, pause for a second, because this is the only episode that John Debney did the score for, and he went on to do movies such as Iron Man 2 and The Passion of the Christ. So he became quite a well-known composer. Anyway, next honorable mention is Thine Own Self. The composer is Dennis McCarthy. Next honorable mention is Night Terrors. The composer is Ron Jones. Next honorable mention is Times Squared. The composer is Dennis McCarthy. Next honorable mention is Lessons. The composer is Dennis McCarthy. Next honorable mention is Lower Decks, the episode. The composer is Jay Chataway. Next honorable mention is Timescape. The composer is Dennis McCarthy. And next honorable mention is Tin Man, and the composer is Jay Chataway. And next honorable mention is Who Watches the Watchers, and the composer is Ron Jones. So now we're getting into my top 3 honorable mentions. So I'll start with, out of these, my first honorable mention, which is Force of Nature. The composer is Dennis McCarthy. Now, Force of Nature is a season 7 episode, and I do have to be fair, that a lot of season 6 and season episodes are the music is very similar, very formulaic. There's this musical cue that is repeated over through Force of Nature, which is your standard, something suspenseful is happening cue that they use in season 6 and 7, but it's just the way that it's used in this episode was something that I have a lot of nostalgic for the score for this episode. It's why I like the episode as much as I do. If it wasn't for the score, I wouldn't think this episode was nearly as good as I do, because I think the way that the score is used to punctuate things like the ship exploding and this weird riff forming really enhances the story. So next honorable mention is Frame of Mind. The composer is Jay Chataway. Now, Frame of Mind is one of my favorite episodes, and I think the music has always stuck out as something very unique. Unlike what I just mentioned of the formulaic music they use in 6 and 7, this is also from season 6, but the music is very unique, and has a typical thriller-esque type theme to it, but I think it's perfect for someone who's losing his mind, and that's exactly what the episode is portraying, Riker losing his mind, and I think the music really enhances that and really gets you in the mindset, particularly when Riker freaks out and doesn't know where he is and what's going on. I think the music crescendos and really punctuates that in a really nice way. So, and my final honorable mention is Darmok. The composer again is Jay Chataway. So Darmok, the music for this episode mainly stands out in the scene in which Dathan, I think his name is, the captain that is there on the planet with Picard when he dies, and Picard is telling the story of Gilgamesh. This scene always brings a tear to my eye, and is mainly because of the music. The music really, really hammers home the emotional impact of the scene. It's quite a beautiful score, mainly for that one scene, but it's really good. So now I'm going to get into my top 10 favorite musical soundtracks for The Next Generation. We'll start with my number 10, which is Tapestry. Composer is Dennis McCarthy. Now, as I mentioned, you hear Dennis McCarthy's name a lot. That's because he was one of the main composers throughout the entirety of Next Generation. Ron Jones was the main one in seasons 1 through 4, and then Jay Chataway was the other main one in seasons 5 through 7. So those are the names you hear repeated most of the time. And I talk a lot on my channel about how I like Dennis McCarthy. He's probably one of my favorite Star Trek composers, but he goes on to do Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, but so does Jay Chataway. But Dennis McCarthy is one that always stuck out to me the most. But anyway, he does the score for Tapestry, and this is a very beautiful score that stands out. And one of the parts that stands out most to me is the moment where, at the very start of the episode, where Picard dies and it seems like he's going into an afterlife, but instead sees Q. Like, the music is very sort of loud and crescendos a lot. Now, Dennis McCarthy talked about a lot about how the producers of Trek tried to ease him back, and they didn't like any music that was too intrusive. In fact, I believe that's part of the reason why Ron Jones quit or was fired, because he was just sick of dealing with that. But Dennis McCarthy did put up with it and did, for the most part, pull back his music. But there's a few examples such as this where he does get away with doing something very powerful. And it's not just the scene at the start, there's also a scene at the end where Picard is in the alternate reality, and he's very upset and, realizing that this is a dreary life he must live. And the music is like very powerful in portraying like the tragedy of this, but then crescendos into something more adventurous when he goes back in time and faces the Nausicaans and puts things right. So overall, always love the soundtrack of this episode. So next, we'll get into my number 9, which is All Good Things. The composer, once again, is Dennis McCarthy. This is one of his, I'm not going to say his masterpiece, but one of his masterpieces. I talked a bit about how season 6 and 7, a lot of the music was very similar and uses the same cues. All Good Things does use that same music that we're familiar with in season 6 and 7, but I think it does it in a more grandiose way, a way where it comes off as more of a movie soundtrack rather than just background TV music. It's more present, more in your face, particularly in scenes that Picard is dealing with the anomaly that is going to destroy all of existence. One of my favorite musical cues from this episode is when Q is explaining, Q takes Picard back in time to like the origins of life on Earth and is explaining that the anomaly prevented it from happening. I thought the music was very relevantly eerie. And in other moments in the episode, when future Picard is seen as going insane, he's seeing figures from Encounter Farpoint, and the music again helps that feeling of insanity, the feeling that something weird is going wrong. And then you have a beautiful sort of loud crescendo at the end of the episode, when the 3 Enterprises go to an anomaly and they each get destroyed one by one. I felt like the music, it's giving me chills just thinking about that music that was done so well. So that's another one of my favorite episodes as far as soundtracks. So now we'll get into my number 8, which is The Defector. The composer is Ron Jones. Now, you might notice I mentioned Ron Jones' name a lot in this top 10. Now, I do talk about a lot in my episode reviews how I think Ron Jones is a bit overrated. And that's just because I've heard a lot of reviewers who seem to state that Ron Jones' music was the only good music in Star Trek, which I disagree with, as you can tell by my countdown, but I still really appreciate his music. Sometimes it can be too invasive for my taste. Like, sometimes I prefer the more subtle music, which is maybe why I lean more towards Dennis McCarthy's music. But other times I think his sort of invasive music really, really works for this episode. And The Defector is a very, very good example of that. The sort of loud, adventurous music that it plays while the Romulan defector is trying to escape from a Romulan warbird really enhances the intensity and the suspense of the scene. It does a really good job of just getting you into that emotional feeling of the stakes of the episode. But my favorite part of the score, which I love the entire score. My favorite part, though, is when the defector Jirok realizes that he had been lied to by the Romulans in order to test him, and that he threw away his entire life for nothing. And I think that the music, the string music that they play really hits home the horror of this moment for him. It really puts you in his mindset, hits the point home of how horrifying this is for this man to find out that his life is completely useless. And then when he commits suicide, the music that accompanies that is really powerful, really tear-inducing. And so I think, I love the music to this episode. So next we'll get into my number 7, which is Face of the Enemy. The composer for this episode is Don Davis. So you might notice this is not one of the 3 big ones. And Don Davis, this is the only episode he composed music for. And Don Davis, you probably know most from doing the score of the Matrix trilogy. And I just found out that this guy the same person who scored the music for Face of the Enemy scored for the Matrix. And when you listen to the soundtrack, you can definitely feel that, because the Matrix has that very epic, very intense music. And Face of the Enemy is very actually similar to that. And the music is something that always hit me, struck a chord with me ever since I first saw this episode when I was a teenager. Something that really stood out, and stood out in a really good way, that really enhanced the episode. And again, the suspense and the intensity and that sort of Matrixy kind of way that I thought was absolutely brilliant. So it was always one of my favorite scores. So next, we will get into my number 6, which is Phantasms. The composer for this is Dennis McCarthy. Now, I just watched an interview with the 3 main composers, Dennis McCarthy, Jay Chataway, and Ron Jones. And in that interview, Dennis McCarthy, when they were asked what their favorite episodes that they scored, Dennis McCarthy mentioned this episode as really able to get away with sort of in-your-face music that he's typically wasn't allowed to get away with, and very dream-like music, especially in the first scene of the episode where Data is dreaming and seeing a lot of weird imagery. The music is very sort of fantastical and sort of helps cue the audience in that this is a dream. They do a couple of wide lenses with the camera as well, but they don't go crazy with the camera tricks. They don't have steam or whatever, or clouds or smoke or whatever. It's just it's mainly the music that they depend on to sort of portray that dreamlike and nightmarish, by the way, because the dream turns into a nightmare, and it really portrays that nightmarish state. And then throughout the episode, which I think this is one of the most creepy episodes of the entire show, and it does it so well, and the music really helps with that tone, really helps with that feeling. When Data stabs Troy, for example, you feel the horror in that moment, and the music really hits home. And when Data starts seeing weird imagery in real life, the music again really helps portray just how weird this is. And then when you have Geordi and Picard go into Data's dream at the end of the episode, again, that dreamlike music that they use to portray just how weird this is really hits home. And then when Data comes to realization on how to defeat these flesh-eating virus, again, the music really hits home that this is a huge accomplishment. So again, the music was a very, very strong component of why I like this episode. So next, we will get into my number 5, which is Clues. The composer is Dennis McCarthy.
Your ship is again in our space.
I was unable to prevent it.
Nevertheless, you are here.
Now, this is an example of more that subtle, sort of less in your face score, which I think can be just as, if not more effective sometimes. And this has some of my favorite moments, such as when the creepy music they play when they show the alien beings taking over Counselor Troy's body, and when Troy confronts Data and he thinks it's just Troy, but it's actually the alien, like the weird, like eerie music that they play in the background. It's subtle, but it really helps, like, to portray just how messed up and just how dire the situation is. And then at the very end of the episode, once they solve the situation, everyone's knocked unconscious, but no one has any memory of the last 2 days, and Data is the only one who remembers, but he had promised never ever to tell anyone. They do something with the music which I think is brilliant. It's brilliant in a really subtle way, but it really hits home the fact that Data knows, but he's not going to tell. Like, they have a moment where Picard is thinking, and they're sort of weighing. You don't know, is Picard going to figure out that something's wrong? Is he going to point something out? And the music, they play this nice musical cue that really shows that things are still on edge. Like, Data is still in his own way, like, on edge, because the Enterprise could still be in danger. But then Picard sort of says, okay, no, let's just go on our merry way. And then they have this nice little close-up of Data just looking the way Data normally does, but the cue, the musical cue, really hits home, and it portrays the message that Data knows. Data knows what happened, and he's going to never tell anyone ever again, and that he's kind of in his own android way sort of coming to terms with that and being okay with that. And the music, see, there's only so much Brent Spiner can do, and while still trying to portray an emotionless android, and that's why you need the music to really, really hit that point home to the audience, and I think it absolutely does it in such a brilliant but subtle way. So next, we will get into my number 4, which is Yesterday's Enterprise, which the composer for this episode is Dennis McCarthy.
Antimatter containment fields are failing. If I can't stabilize them, I'll have to dump the reactor core, she'll blow.
Once again, Yesterday's Enterprise, I think, is again it portrays this dark parallel or alternate timeline that needs to be changed, that shouldn't exist, but it's very war-torn, very dark-like, and the music does a brilliant job to reflect this, to reflect a much darker, sort of more dire tone. So it's similar to the other music of season 3, but with a slight, as I said, subtle sort of change to help clue you in that this is not right, that things are not right. And there's a lot of really nice adventurous music as well, particularly when the Enterprise comes under attack from Klingon birds of prey. The music is very sort of exciting and really sells the moment of the crew heroically sacrificing themselves in order to restore the timeline. And one moment in particular when you see like the warp core and engineering like starting to buckle, like you realize this is going to explode, like the music they play is nice. Again, this is more sort of getting away with something that's less subtle and more in your face music that really sells this. And again, this is another episode Dennis McCarthy talked about in the interview I watched, where he said this is one of his favorite scores, and that he took the one score he was able to take the Masters home was this one. That he just was so proud of this episode, which I believe was nominated for an award. So yeah, it's definitely an amazing score. So next, we'll get into my number 3, which is The Inner Light. Composer is Jade Chataway. Now, it's mainly the flute music that's why the episode is as high as it is. Now, I also mentioned Lessons in my honorable mention, which also featured the flute music, and it also had a piano accompaniment to the flute music, which made it a little bit better. However, the flute music was originally introduced in this episode, and plus this is a much better episode, and the music really, really sells this episode. Particularly the fact that they end the whole episode on just Picard playing the flute is one of the most tear-inducing moments of the entire show. I've recently watched tons of reactions, I should say, live reactions of people who never seen the episode before, just completely in tears at this moment, which mirrors what my viewing was this episode several times, almost every time I watch it, and a lot does have to do with the music and how it sells it throughout the entire episode. So it's a huge accomplishment for Jay Chataway. Now, there's a full orchestral score of this music, which wasn't actually featured in this episode, but it was like a regular song I used to listen to on a regular basis when I was a teenager, like with all the other rock music and modern music, my mixtapes or whatever. I'd throw in this Inner Light orchestral theme because it was so damn good, and I remember playing it for my ex-wife, who was my fiance at the time, and she's like, "Where's this from? You gotta show me the episode or the movie or whatever." And I was like, "It's from a Star Trek episode." It's like, "You gotta show me this episode." And that's how I got her into Star Trek, was by showing her the Inner Light. She's like, "This is the episode with the music." And Jay Chataway even talked about how like people played that musical piece at their weddings and stuff, that it was like almost the biggest sort of hit single ever to come out of Star Trek, even though it wasn't, the musical piece wasn't entirely featured in this episode, which is why I have it at number 3. If they actually had that full musical piece in the episode, then it probably would be my number 1, but I had to be fair because in the episode they only play the simple flute version, which is still awesome though. So it is my number 3. Alright, so now we'll get into my number 2, which is The Mind's Eye. The composer is Dennis McCarthy.
2 birds of prey approaching.
Now, this is similar to Clues, where this is a very more subtle score, although there are parts of the score which are quite loud in a very good way and sort of present, I should probably say, rather than loud. Particularly the opening scene where Geordi is abducted by the Romulans. The score is very sort of present, but it really, really hits home the horror and the terror of the situation. But the one scene I remember this episode for the most is the scene where Geordi had just beamed a bunch of weapons to the Klingon ships, and of course Picard and people on the bridge had no idea about this, and the Klingon governor, hails them in order to threaten their ship. And the subtle way, and this is more just the music, this is also the sound design, but the music in particular is what really sells this, because it has that creepy underlying, like subtle but like underneath everything, like string music that tells you that something is wrong even before Picard doesn't know that something's terribly wrong. But then it's starts to just gradually get more higher and higher, and more terrifying as the Klingon governor starts yelling at Picard and threatening to blow up their ship. And they use that, typical, Jerry Goldsmith Klingon music just ever so slightly in the background, just to sort of enhance it. These Klingons are not to be fucked with. Also, as well as that eerie sort of string music that tells you that something's really, really wrong. And then as the Klingon birds of prey decloak, like you hear nice loud musical cues to really hammer home just how freaking terrifying this situation is, and how the Enterprise is in dire danger at the moment. And then it crescendos into the commercial break with a huge, like, typical of Dennis McCarthy, but in the best way possible. And so I always loved that. To me, that's like one of my favorite musical moments of the entire show. But there's also music at the end of the episode when Data is figuring out that Geordi's been brainwashed, and you get you have these nice subtle musical cues as Data's talking to the computer, and the computer is giving him the information. You hear this cue going, essentially going, he's figuring it out, and it's just so brilliant. And then of course the eerie music that's playing while Geordi's walking towards the shuttle bay or the cargo bay where he's going to murder a man. The music really is intense and really sells just how dangerous this situation is. So it's just a brilliant score overall. And to be honest, like, the reason why I like The Mind's Eye as much as I do is because of the music. If it wasn't for the music, I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10. Like, the music alone pushes this episode up 2 points. But anyway, let me get into my number 1 favorite episode soundtrack of Star Trek Next Generation, and that is The Best of Both Worlds.
Mr. Worf, fire.
Now, if you know me, if you know my channel, you know that I do like The Best of Both Worlds, but not nearly as much as everyone else seems to. For example, I wouldn't put this in my top 10 or top 20 best episodes of Next Generation, as most people would have this in their top 3 best episodes of Next Generation. But one thing I do acknowledge that I do agree with everyone else on is the music. Oh, and by the way, the composer for The Best of Both Worlds is Ron Jones. So I did put Ron Jones up at number 1, so I do appreciate him sometimes, and this is definitely a lot of reasons why a lot of people do notice Ron Jones more than anyone else is because of this episode, which is fair, because he does an absolutely amazing job through this episode. He talk about really selling the suspense. Like, this is movie level quality. In fact, I think does even better than a lot of movie soundtracks of selling the adventure, selling the suspense, selling the sense of danger that they're in. The moment when Picard first encounters the Borg and says, contact Starfleet and tell them we have engaged the Borg, and the music, really exciting musical cue they play to that is just so good. It's so amazing. Really sells the moment. Not to mention, like, the eeriness of it when Picard is taken captive by the Borg as he's being assimilated. The music really sells just the eeriness and the creepiness and the sort of sadness of the situation. And then you have the best cliffhanger of all time at the end of part 1, where Riker tells Worf to fire on the Borg ship to essentially kill Picard. And the music, oh my god, this is probably the best sort of suspense, edge of your seat musical cue that really hammers home the episode. A lot of people talked about how it was so difficult to go 3 months before seeing the resolution of the cliffhanger, and I think a lot of that really hits home, that really has that oomph to it when the episode ends. You see the words "to be continued" come up, is the music. That music really hits you in the face and really hits home just how powerful that moment is. And then at the end of episode 2, after everything's solved and they defeat the Borg, You know, you have that nice cue where, you know, everyone's happy. They're in the Picard's ready room and just saying, "Oh yeah, everything's good. Riker doesn't want to be captain. That's all good. Mind your own business." All that thing. But then once Riker and Shelby leave the ready room, Picard looks out into space, and as you can tell by Patrick Stewart's great performance, just how struck he is, just how affected he is about the experience, and how it's not going to simply go away, and how this is something that's going to really disturb him and really traumatize him, I should say, for a really good long while. And the music absolutely sells this moment. It sells this in such a great way. Don't get me wrong, Patrick Stewart is an amazing performance, but that scene would not be half as powerful as it is if it wasn't for the music that really sells just how traumatizing this is for Picard. So the entire score of Best of Both Worlds is absolutely amazing. So that is my number one favorite Star Trek Next Generation episode soundtrack. So that is it for my top 10 favorite episode soundtracks of Star Trek Next Generation. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek, covering Star Trek Next Generation at the moment, episode by episode, and doing many more videos on Star Trek, as well as many videos on other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.